Hello and welcome everyone to one of Toyota's most controversial and most anticipated releases of the last few years, with this, the 2021 Toyota Supra 2.0. Now, as the name suggests, it does have a smaller engine than the flagship Supra 3.0, but there's still plenty to like here. I'm going to give you a complete tour around it. We're going to take it out for a spin, but before that, I want to make sure you guys like the video and subscribe to the channel. Before we jump in and go for a drive, I want to give you guys a quick look at the engine, because this is a turbocharged 2-liter 4-cylinder that comes from BMW. Now, you may have seen it in other models such as the Z4, 3 Series, or the 4 Series, but in this scenario, it makes 255 horsepower and around 300 pound-feet of torque. So let's check it out. So now we're behind the wheel of the 2021 Toyota Supra, and this is a vehicle I've been super excited to try because earlier this year I got to test out the 2020 Supra with the turbocharged inline-6 engine developing over 300 horsepower. Now, when the release of the 4-cylinder turbocharged Supra came out, I thought that made a lot of sense. Given that the Supra is co-developed between Toyota and BMW, then swapping in one of BMW's other engines didn't seem like it would be kind of complicated, and it hasn't. Same with the transmission. The 8-speed automatic transmission we have in here also lives across various BMWs. Even if it is an 8-speed automatic, just like in the other Supra, the tuning in this one is completely different. Now, I will say I have not driven the 2021 Supra 3.0, but hopefully we'll get to do that at some point. But I very much remember how much the 2020 was and how much of a difference this 21 Supra 2.0 is. So let's talk about power figures, because I feel this is one of the most controversial and actually important points about the Toyota Supra 2.0. Because as you know, the 2-liter turbocharged engine under the hood develops 255 horsepower and 300 pound-feet of torque. Now, the torque is the magic number there, because let's say if we were to compare this to another 4-cylinder sporty Toyota like the 86, that has to make do with around 151 pound-feet of torque, whereas this has 300. Now, while the Supra is heavier than the 86, it's not enough of a difference to offset a 100 pound-feet of torque difference. Because I saw a lot of people arguing online when this car was initially released, saying along the lines of like, why would you spend almost 20 grand over a Toyota 86 and you're only getting, let's say, 50 extra horsepower, and it was a sort of marginal benefit? But that is not true at all. This is a significant increase. There is nothing here that feels like the Toyota 86. And I will say that the price difference between the Supra, the $43,000 Supra, and the $20-something thousand Toyota 86 is absolutely justified. So let's talk about how that power actually makes it onto the road, because there is an 8-speed automatic transmission that sends all of the available power to the rear wheels. And I feel the transmission is actually one of few faults that I've found so far with this Supra, which granted there aren't many, but there are some worth mentioning. For example, this transmission in the 2020 Supra that I drove earlier this year was actually much sharper. It was quick to downshift. It was very responsive. In this car, however, it feels very slow in terms of like when you're coming down on downshifts, it's very slow to go down to the gear that you want. So if we pop it over to the left, that engages the sort of manual mode with the paddles, and I can go down on an 8th gear, 7th gear, 5th gear, 4th gear. The top gears, it shifts down quite quickly. That has to be said. But when you get into the lower gears, when you're trying to get into like a 3rd or 2nd gear, it takes a little while to kick down, and it doesn't do so in a very smooth way. You get a bit of a lunge when it does that. And another thing is that if you're driving around in the available sport mode, which, you know, sharpens up the throttle, it actually opens up the exhaust a little bit. The transmission itself, whatever tuning it has, it's very sort of it's not very smooth, let's say. All the shifts feel rough. You can feel them. If you're going at low speed, you can feel the transmission kind of jerking back and forth, and it's not a very pleasant experience. Now, if you drive it in the non-sport mode tuning of the transmission, it's perfectly fine, and I have absolutely no complaints. It drives like you would expect a regular 8-speed automatic to do so. But I did find that if you are driving, selecting your gears by yourself, and you want a very nice, quick shifting experience, you want to shift when the car is in its prime power band. Because if you wait all the way till you're at the top of the rev range, it doesn't happen quite as quickly than if you had done it when the car is in sort of peak torque and peak power. So let's quickly shift gears onto how the Supra drives, because there are some major physical differences between the 3-liter Supra and the 2-liter Supra, they go beyond just the engine, because the 3-liter Supra has adaptive dampers, which you can select how stiff, how firm you want the suspension to be, whereas in this one you don't have that option. You have one suspension setup, which I think it's actually done very well. And although this Supra doesn't have adjustable suspension, it still feels quite comfortable. Don't get me wrong, it is stiff, it is still a sports car, but the suspension was not going to break your back, basically. I will say, however, that because the hood is so long and you're sitting basically right in front of the rear wheels, when you do go over smaller bumps, let's say speed bumps or going into parking garages or something like that, you do feel a bit of a bounce from the rear end, but on regular commuting, regular highway driving, that sort of thing, you don't get that a lot. The plus here is that the Supra feels incredibly stable at speed and shows very little to no body roll, at least in my experience. But the big key here, because I live in Florida, there aren't a whole lot of twisty turns for me to go around, but in terms of carrying speed, the Supra is fantastic. This car will happily sit at 3-digit speeds all day long without breaking an absolute sweat, which is a testament not only to the torquey engine that actually delivers a good amount of punch, but also the suspension, everything. There's no extra wind or anything that offsets this car. Everything feels incredibly stable, incredibly well put together. Let's talk styling, because I feel this is something kind of controversial for the Supra, and I feel the Supra does not photograph well. And I mean that by saying that it looks so much better in person. I've seen the argument being made that the Supra is not pretty enough, that we should have kept that original concept that Toyota showed, but I feel the Toyota Supra looks fantastic, especially the rear 3/4, because the sort of wide rear arches, you can actually see them in your mirrors as you're driving, so you're kind of constantly reminded that you're driving something special. Especially this particular car in this color of yellow, everywhere you look, you can see little bits of yellow letting you know that you're not just in a regular commuter car, you're not in any regular car. This is flashy, but it's done so in a very, very good way. I love the fact that the hood is very, very long, and in fact, if you raise the hood to see the engine, the hood actually makes up part of the two front fenders. It's a very, very, very wide front hood, but I think it looks fantastic. There's elements of design all throughout this car. Even the roof. The roof has a nice dip in it. It could have just been a flat panel, but they chose not to do that, and they went the extra mile, and I think as a result, the Supra looks fantastic. I will say, however, that because this is the 2-liter model, it gets smaller 18-inch wheels, which I feel look a little too small. I love the larger wheels that you get in the 3-liter Supra, but again, you can opt for larger wheels if you get the 3-liter Supra, or you can replace. Something I especially like about the exterior are actually the taillights and the headlights, because the headlights have this long strip of daytime running lights, because I've seen plenty of other Supras on the road, especially at night when a Supra is coming up from behind you. Those LED daytime running lights look absolutely incredibly sharp, and the tail lights for me, again, very, very sharp, very, very nicely done. You can tell it's a high quality product, and you can tell that it's definitely worth the premium that you're paying for it. Speaking of premium, let's turn over to the cabin, because there's a lot of premium materials here, as you'd expect from any product developed with BMW and Toyota. But I will say the leather quality of the seats is fantastic. The dashboard has a very, very nice layout. I will say everything is dark, so it is very, very dark in here. Even during the day, the dash, everything looks kind of dark, but I don't mind it. I feel the layout is fantastic. I don't typically like this sort of tablet style sort of plopped on the dashboard, but this being a very wide screen, it actually looks very nice. It is touch, but you do also have the addition of a controller down in the center console, so you have the ability to manage both however you want to interact with the screen. Personally, I've been using BMW's controller down here. I feel like it's fine. It has all sorts of functionality, and I feel it's very, very easy to control. I feel like using the touch might be a little bit too distracting, but using the controller is absolutely fine. Now, something else you'll notice in the center console is the fact that we have carbon fiber. For me, the only thing I kind of find a little odd is the fact that this is the only bit of carbon fiber in this entire car. So I would have liked to see maybe some more carbon fiber elements to tie them all together, but this one looks perfectly fine. I just feel like it looks a little lonely. Like it could have used maybe a little bit extra carbon, but it's nice to know that that's an option, and that could really make your interior look quite upscale. One downside to the interior, however, is that there is a lot of tire noise, there's a lot of wind noise. It is surprisingly loud in here. Now, I have not tested the BMW Z4 to be able to compare how it does in that situation, but in the Supra, it is a little bit loud, a little bit noisy, especially on the highway. I do have to speak up a little bit. Thankfully, this Supra does have the JBL speaker system, so you do get some nice sound from that, but you do have to turn it up quite a bit if you're on the highway because there's a lot of intrusive noise. But other than that one downside, the cabin is fantastic. I will say there isn't a whole lot of visibility because it is a very short car and the windows themselves are kind of thin, so you feel like you could feel a little claustrophobic. It's not Miata style claustrophobia, but it is a bit on the smaller side. That's one thing that I feel doesn't come across well in Supra photos and video, is how small this car is. This is, I would say, slightly larger than an 8.6, but not by a whole lot. It's actually quite wide, but it's not entirely incredibly long, and the cabin itself is a little on the small side, but then again, sports car. So there we have it, the 2021 Supra, and I have to say this is a car that very much surprised me. I was very ready to say that you need the 3-liter, you need the bigger engine, but in this case, you don't. The 2-liter Supra is a sports car in its own right. It's powerful, it feels premium, and it's definitely worth its $43,000 starting price. And with that, I have to say that it is very, very impressive in terms of what they've been able to do, even with the smaller engine, and how much of that Supra character carries over from the large car into the less powerful car. And with that, I want to thank you so much for watching. I want to make sure you guys like the video, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you again very soon.